The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. This was the Lord's doing and is amazing in our eyes. One definition of a cornerstone is this: it is a person or a thing of vital or prime importance. Now, on October the 8th, some 40 years ago, my wife Sharon and I laid the cornerstone for our married life. And it was the beginning of a long period of relationship development and growing together. We made God and love the cornerstone of our lives. Love for God and love for each other. Today, 40 years later, here we are, still in love, proving that love works. And today we are celebrating that blessed event in our lives. Now, Sharon is not here right now. She's not a morning person. But she will be here for the 11:15 Mass. Be assured. In looking at our society and our world today, it's easy to wonder if God can still love our world and smile upon it. But my gut feeling is that our spontaneous impulse is rather to protest, to condemn, and to point out the world's faults, the world's sin, its injustice, and its indifference to God. It's easy to look at the world, to look for its cornerstone, and to see all manner of things in that prime place, except God, of course. But here's the thing. The world is still God's creation, still lives under God's primal blessing, and postmodern or not, it is still loved by God. Its marvelous achievements reflect both God's greatness and human cooperation with God's power. The world still honors both God and humanity. And it is for this great love and great mercy we are moved to give God thanks each Sunday, and especially so on this Thanksgiving weekend, and to recenter our lives on Him as our cornerstone. But today we live in a very mixed reality. There are indeed times and places when we can see people working with God and building on the gifts that God has given to us. On the one hand, the world is full of generosity, sincerity, creativity, imagination, and ingenuity. Daily, we see real advancement in moral sensitivity, in knowledge, in art and technology. But we know that cooperation with God is not always the case. The world is also full of infidelity, injustice, individualism, and greed. There's an excess of forces that constitute a virtual conspiracy against the poor, the family, and the elderly. It is a world within which progress itself often comes at the expense of the poor, and that progress causes us to be blind to those who fall through its cracks. And in seeing this side, we might ask, how did this world come to such a sorry state? Well, we hear in today's gospel the story about a landlord who created a vineyard and leased it to tenants, who refused to give back the harvest owed to the landlord. Who are those tenants, we might ask, and why are they so disrespectful to the landlord? Well, I am one of these tenants, and I have to ask myself sometimes, am I willing to give back all the gifts that I have been given by God to Him? My possessions, my work, my talents, and my family have all been placed in my care, not for me, but to be offered back to God as gifts. God is the landowner, and I, as one of the tenants, must with a grateful heart offer back to Him the fruits of these gifts. It is when we withhold these gifts, like the tenants of the parable today, that the worst of the world rears its ugly head. These instances of withholding goodness are not difficult to find, and very often we tend to take a negative or dim view of our world in light of them. We do not weep over the world in sympathy as Jesus wept over Jerusalem. No, Rather, the temptation is to stand in blanket judgment of our world, refusing to recognize and bless its goodness. And the world is not blind to our judgment either. For the most part, it views us, the church, and so-called organized religion with suspicion, sometimes even contempt, as standing in narrow and naive judgment of it, as simplistic and fundamentalist, the enemy of the world's life and creativity. The world does not believe in our sympathy and looks to us neither for comfort nor guidance. So what then is to be our response to this worldview? Well, first of all, we must let ourselves be healed by the world's critique of us. Its anger, accusations, anti-clericalism, and indifference constitute for us an important road to look inward at our own attitudes as a road to forgiveness and humility. Next, our attitude must mirror God's attitude. Christ must be our cornerstone and model. And accordingly, we must comfort and bless the world's life and goodness, even as we disturb and challenge its injustice and infidelities. We must comfort it in its pain, affirm its goodness, and help it to direct its energy towards God, towards community, towards justice, and towards compassion. We must bless the world by letting it know that God still looks at it and says, "You are my beloved. You are my beloved." But that said, however, greed and disregard are obstacles to this. The life to which God calls us gets buried. However, it rises again when we look to Jesus, when Jesus is reset as the cornerstone of our lives. He is love. He is there for us in our vineyard, and we must give back to God the fruits of our labor. Ultimately, what we must do is show the world the cross of Christ. We must make the world aware that the one whom it commonly rejects, the one whom it crucifies, the poor one, the helpless one, the insignificant one, must be the cornerstone for its final progress. These are the ones with whom Christ identifies. And if Christ is to be our cornerstone, then we would do well to be attentive to those he has accepted, even though they are rejected by the world. But how can we situate Christ as our cornerstone? What does that look like in our lives? Well, we can give back to God and to the world the gifts and talents that God bestowed on us, our possessions, our time, our talent, our treasure, because the end of the story is love. And we must set aside our own self-interest and focus on Jesus Christ. And we can only do this if we view the world through a prism of hope within which we bless its goodness and challenge its sin, even as we trust that God still deeply loves this postmodern planet. You see, the Son sent into the vineyard is Jesus himself. He is to be rejected and killed, just as the prophets and the owner's sons were. But here's the difference. As God's Son, Jesus is entirely willing to go among the people. He lives by compassion, and danger takes second place. Jesus, in spite of being rejected by humanity, reconciled humanity to himself by his death on the cross. Life always goes back to its source, the cornerstone, the everlasting union called by that simple name, love. Jesus is the cornerstone we need and long for to build our lives. St. Augustine said, "Our hearts are restless until they rest in God." God, in his mercy, sent Jesus into our world, not to condemn it, but to save it. God sent his Son into the trap of human life, not because life is perfect, but because love is. And God is love.